With one series of games finally completed, we now move on to another with the Devil May Cry series, one of Capcom's other profitable franchises. These games won second place on my marathon vote I did a few years back, and we can now add Devil May Cry 5 to the list, which just came out today. It's the first game in the main series since 2008, so of course we gotta celebrate the occasion. But first, let's start at the beginning with the original Devil May Cry for the PlayStation 2 and see how well it holds up today. Mr. Kamiya, we meet again. He's been appearing in a lot of my reviews lately, several times during the Platinum Games Marathon, and more recently when I looked at Resident Evil 2. And speaking of Resident Evil 2, shortly after that game's release, Hideki Kamiya started work on a brand new Resident Evil title that was meant to be the fourth game in the series for the freshest home console at the time, the PlayStation 2. So yes, before we got the actual Resident Evil 4, we had this. The whole idea of the game was supposed to be you as the hero fighting your way past zombies in a cool and stylized manner, but Capcom producer Shinji Mikami thought it strayed too far from the traditional Resident Evil formula. However, the idea of clearing the area and looking as awesome as possible while doing so was still an intriguing concept to Mikami, so he convinced the Capcom staff to turn this idea into its own separate game. After the sudden change, Kamiya had to rework the story and the protagonist, and instead of zombies being the main threat, there were now hordes of demons to slay. And sure enough, Devil May Cry was an astounding success, spawning its own franchise out of the Resident Evil name. We'll be looking at the 2012 HD versions of the first three games for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and around a year ago the collection also came out for the PlayStation 4. From what I've gathered, there's basically next to no difference between the 7th and 8th generation copies. I think the only slight change is the 1080p resolution on the PS4 versions, which isn't a huge loss I suppose because the PS3 and 360 versions still run at a consistent 60 frames per second, so I can take or leave the lower resolution that you can probably barely notice. Just keep in mind that throughout my reviews of Devil May Cry 1, 2, and 3, I will be spoiling whatever little story there is since the trilogy's well over 15 years old at this time. Probably won't matter to a lot of you, but I do get the rare jackass that would have called me out otherwise. Our story begins in the middle of the night where we're introduced to our main protagonist named Dante, taken from the Italian poem Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Early on, he's revealed to be the half-human, half-demon offspring of the legendary Sparta who fell in love with Dante's human mother, Eva. Dante's the owner of a rundown demon-killing business that he calls Devil May Cry, and makes sure it stays afloat to take revenge on those that slaughtered Eva, as well as his brother Virgil. Dante's latest client is this tall blonde lady called Trish who really needs to put some meat on her bones, as she kindly asks him to help her with her demon problems. If you consider brutally attacking the man in his own building and piercing him through the chest to be asking politely. Don't worry though, the demon side of Dante makes him totally invulnerable. Turns out that was just a test for Dante's abilities to see if he's the real deal, and good thing Trish was right, otherwise she would have just killed an innocent man. Trish requests that Dante takes on the Emperor of the Underworld named Mundus, who Sparta apparently clashed swords with 20 years ago and is responsible for the deaths of Eva and Virgil. And as if that wasn't enough of a reason to kill Mundus, Dante also agrees to the task because Trish coincidentally closely resembles Eva. The two of them head to a castle in this uncharted bit of land called Malay Island, where Trish leapfrogs to somewhere in said castle, leaving Dante to climb from the very bottom. There are plenty of strong demons to fight like the giant spider Phantom, a decaying griffin, the huge piece of crap that is Nightmare, or the fast and spry Nilo Angelo. And before you know it, we eventually reach the underworld and meet with Mundus. However, just before we encounter him, we see that Trish is actually another demon working for Mundus, and that Russell's Dante's jimmies, but he still ends up saving her just before she's crushed by debris in the same scene. As Mundus tries to rid of Dante though, Trish takes his place to return the favor, leading to this amazingly delivered line from Dante.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
See, this is what happens when you hire a prepubescent boy to voice your main character. Well, the anger unleashes Dante's full demon side and the battle against Mundus is on. One spam of the devil trigger later and the Overlord is defeated, with the island collapsing afterwards because this wouldn't be a Capcom game without something crumbling at the end. The injured Mundus seems to have followed Dante into the human world though, but with a helping hand from the returning Trish, one last shot blasts away Mundus as he vows for his grand return. The two escape on a conveniently placed airplane, and back home they're now working together as partners with the business renamed Devil Never Cry. That doesn't flow with the tongue as well. So yeah, Yeah, that's the original Devil May Cry. It's certainly the first game, alright, and you know what, for what it is, it does its job fine. It quickly establishes the characters and gives Dante some basic motivation for his line of work. In traditional Capcom fashion, it's not meant to be taken seriously, and lets the action provide the entertainment. The writing has the staple goofiness Capcom's well known for, and while the acting's slightly better than the early Resident Evils, it's more wooden than it is silly, which isn't quite as fun to watch, though the dialogue still has its moments. Shoutouts to Trish referring to herself as Dante's sidekick like in a 60s Batman episode, and Dante telling Trish she's more human than demon because devils never cry. Jesus Christ.
Trish, devils never cry.
Right, now for the gameplay, which is really the only reason to pick up the original Devil May Cry. This is pretty much the pioneer for spectacle fighters, where the aim of the game is to kill monsters and demons while looking as amazing as you can. The better you perform, the better your rank, that's shown in the top right of the screen. However, unlike most spectacle fighters these days, you only have one button to attack with. Oh, you have a lock-on button as well, and another button to fire your guns, but in terms of melee attacks, it's all just one button. You can perform different strikes by leaving a delay at certain points in the combo, but that's all the variety you're gonna get, and this goes for every weapon. When you begin, Dante's only equipped with his sword, the Rebellion, and his two pistols, Ebony and Ivory, but as the game goes on, while he only acquires a few additional melee weapons, he will gain a repertoire of guns that are useful for different situations, though I mostly use the shotgun on enemies because of how powerful it is, and I didn't often swap between my melee weapons. These come in the forms of Alistair, that's just the Rebellion but stronger, Ifrit, that lets you hit harder with flaming punches and kicks but at a short distance and not as rapidly, and there's the Force Edge, which is more powerful than Alistair, but you can't use Dante's Devil Trigger mode while equipped. Devil Trigger simply just makes you move faster and do more damage for a limited time, which you'll find in a lot of future spectacle fighters. When you're a demon, you also have access to more abilities that you can buy from the shops, like a homing spin attack on the enemy, or my personal favorite, the mid-air lightning strikes, which can absolutely break some of the boss fights. Devil Trigger abilities aren't the only thing you can purchase though, as Alistair and Ifrit have their own moves that don't add a lot in terms of fluid combat, but they do help keep the combo going for a better rank. Your rank is determined by the variety of attacks you use and not giving the enemy a break. You could just keep shooting enemies from a far distance and get by the game okay, but your performance at the end of each mission will always come up pretty poor. This may not sound like too much of a big deal, but the better your rank, the more red orbs you'll obtain, which are needed to buy restoring items and upgrades to not only your weapons, but also your health and Devil Trigger meters. With your health, however, you can always explore in very specific spots for blue orb fragments that basically act like pieces of heart from The Legend of Zelda, where finding 4 of them increases your health by a little bit. If that seems like a hassle though, then there's always the secret missions you can locate that reward blue orb fragments upon fulfilling the requirements. Getting the top rank in the original Devil May Cry can often at times be insanely tricky. I get the S rank in battles maybe a couple of times at a good chunk of the missions, but I'm still left with an average grade at the end and I never understand why. I try and clear the mission as fast as I can and make sure I don't get hurt too many times, so I don't know, I think the game can just be really stingy. Devil May Cry is no walk in the park either, it gets pretty damn hard at times. Dante may be invincible during cutscenes, but gameplay is an entirely different story, and there's no explanation for why this is. Dante's movements are also quite stiff by today's standards. You can control him in any direction, which is a plus, but attacking and jumping will take time to get used to, especially with the few platforming sections the game randomly places. Hope you're a fast learner though, because some enemies can do a ludicrous amount of damage if they trap you, maybe even take away all of your health if you're unlucky enough, and you only have a limited amount of lives before you're booted back to your last save. You can increase your lives by finding or purchasing yellow orbs, but not only does the price get higher as you buy them, the lives also don't reset when you start over, so you have to make sure each one counts. Bosses are no slouch either, they're always moving or barely giving you a break from their attacks, and you have to fight each of them twice. The only exception being Nilo Angelo, who encounters you 3 times, where after the 3rd fight we discover that it's actually a revived Virgil, as evidenced by his half of the amulet Eva gave him, with Dante holding the other and can now fuse both halves together. Yeah, and that's kind of all I have to say about the first Devil May Cry. It's aged for sure, and I probably wouldn't recommend this as your first one, but there's no harm in doing so if you really want to play the series in order of release. Stylishly killing demons can be tons of fun and you feel like a badass while doing so. The gothic atmosphere is very cool even to this day, and I also like the occasional fixed camera angles returning from Resident Evil. The heavy metal music's not my thing personally, but I know others will find it okay, and Devil May Cry doesn't look too bad for an extremely early PS2 title. Sound mixing is another thing, however. I don't know if this was in the PS2 original as well, but the music in the HD versions is way too damn loud out to the point that you sometimes can't hear what the characters are saying. There is an option for subtitles, but that only applies to the bosses and their gargled speeches. I don't know why you'd even want to turn that off. Still, the combat is what you're here for, and the first Devil May Cry is satisfying enough on that front. You can clear it in just around 4.5 hours as well, which I get is a pretty short length, but I think that's fine. It's as long as it needs to be. I can't imagine spending 10 hours or so with a game like this. It'd likely overstay its welcome by that point. You've got plenty of options to play it nowadays, so if you like what you see, yeah, I'd say give it a shot. It's by no means the best of the bunch, but it's a classic for a good reason. Fairly good start so far, but would you be surprised if I told you that we're already approaching the low point of the series? For our next Devil May Cry review, we'll be looking at the second game to see why it was such a huge step back, but like with the Kingdom Hearts reviews, I think it might be worth sticking with that same format of doing a totally separate game before moving on to the next game in the marathon. So let's say we do the Resident Evil 2 remake next time, and then move on to Devil May Cry 2 afterwards. See you all then, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. The first game in the main series since 2008, so of course we'll be looking at the second game to meet... I'm messing up so much, I need water. So, I hope you all... No! Thank God, that take took far too long.